So the year was all the way back in 2013. It would have been the very early 2013, and I built my first gaming PC. So today I thought it'd be really fun if I just sort of rebuild it, at least rebuild it by the spec of the original gaming PC, and then stack it up against some more modern titles to see if my original gaming PC built in early 2013 could still actually keep you afloat here in early 2023. The answer almost certainly is no, but we're gonna try it anyways. So I suspect I'm not the only person to ever get into PC gaming on the back of a tax return check, but that's exactly what happened back in 2013. I built my first gaming PC, and the specs of it were modest for the price I actually paid for the PC. I really dumped some money into some less than optimized parts, like spent a lot on a case and power supply and motherboard and things, but here are the specs of that original PC. On the CPU side of things, there was an FX 4300. This was a quad-core CPU. You could argue whether it's 2 cores or 4 cores here in 2023, but the reality is back in 2013, it was decidedly considered a quad-core, at least by AMD's marketing team. Now, with that CPU, I did have 16 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. Now, back then, I was using a 2x8 gigabyte kit. I don't have that on hand today. Instead, I have a 4x4 gigabyte kit. It's a small change that shouldn't really impact the performance of the games a whole lot. The GPU is literally identical to that original system. I'm using the OG GTX 660 that I actually bought back in those days. The only difference with this GPU is that the card itself is the same, but somewhere along the way, I swapped out the cooler when I actually got my hands on a different EVGA GTX 660. So I got rid of the original blower style cooler, and I have a twin fan style cooler on that EVGA card, but the card is identical and still running to this day. And the other big change to the specs is originally I was running a 1 terabyte Western Digital hard drive. Today, I'm running everything off of a SATA-based SSD because, frankly, I don't want to wait on everything to load up. And it shouldn't affect the frame rates of the game a whole lot, but it is worth noting that is a true difference between the original and the current test bench setup. And this is where things actually got a little bit surprising. I fully expected the games I was throwing at this rig to basically not allow it to run. Not so. Now, the CSGO result here is not actually overly surprising. This is an old game, but it's still one of the most popular on Steam. The average at 92 FPS, perfectly acceptable for a title like this. You could actually be pretty competitive if you're a good CSGO player running on this setup. Now, the 1% and 0.1% lows do leave quite a bit to be desired, and if you're sort of an uncompetitive player like me, you could still have a pretty good time playing this game. If you're super competitive, those frame drops where the frame time spikes that's going to be a problem. But if you're just a non-competitive player that's just out there to have fun, you could actually probably accomplish that with this PC at 1080p on those high settings. And that's where the proverbial wheels fall off this wagon. Moving over to Doom Eternal. Yikes. So running at 720p low settings, the average is just 33 FPS. The 1% low is dreadful at 21, and the 0.1% low also dreadful at 19. This is not a playable experience. You would not have fun playing Doom Eternal on this PC. Technically, you could do it. You just wouldn't have a good time. That was true of The Witcher 3 as well. The average is okay. The problem is that 1% and 0.1% lows. The footage should do an excellent job of actually showing this. Sometimes you can capture exactly what kind of stuttering issues you're running into on the screen capture. Other times you really struggle to capture those sort of small jitters. These were massive drops though, where you would have the game basically freeze for a second or two before it would resume. Yes, you could get into the game. Yes, you could run around. And actually, the average frame rate looks respectable for 720p low settings, but it's completely unplayable. Complete mess. The 4300 and the GTX 660, not good here. we actually got one encouraging result, and that was in Hogwarts Legacy at 720p render resolution on low settings. And I fully expected this game to barely load, much less actually get into the game. It gives you a warning about how it's not a supported driver edition because the GTX 660 is long since abandoned on the driver front. But then in the game, it was actually bordering on playable. In fact, if I had to label as either playable or unplayable, I would actually call this playable. The average was 31, the 1% low was 22, 0.1% low was 16. But for the most part, the frame rate was sort of there in the upper 20s, and there'd be an occasional stutter or frame drop, but it was actually playable. And this isn't so encouraging for a setup like this, where it would be encouraging for someone with these exact specs. Like, you're not going to want to play this game on an FX 4300 paired with a GTX 660. But what is encouraging about this title, it looks like, is going to age very well because it already apparently runs quite well on aging hardware. And then just for fun, I threw Cinebench R20 at the old FX 4300, and it was running at 4.3 gigahertz in all of these tests. The Ryzen 5950X there, that's not its maximum performance for the 5950X, as other things were running in the background, but you can see the comparison here. Obviously, the 5950X in single-threaded performance is way better than the 4300. And then going over to the multi-thread, the exact same type of thing here. The 5950X is not running to its maximum potential here. Again, I had other things running in the background when I ran that test, but the FX 4300 is just obliterated by the Ryzen 5950X in Cinebench R20, which was a completely expected result. So taking a walk down memory lane with the FX 4300 paired with a GTX 660, what strikes me about this setup is it was by no means a high-end setup when it originally was put together in early 2013, and it actually held up pretty well. Like, it was my main setup for a couple of years, and I threw some incremental upgrades at it. Eventually, I would upgrade to a GTX 970, and at the time when I made that upgrade, I wasn't upgrading because the GTX 660 was no longer getting me the performance I needed. It was simply because I had the means to upgrade, and I did want the upgrade. But the GTX 660 served me incredibly well in the time that I had that card as my main system. The FX 4300 was upgraded a little bit quicker. I think I mentioned in the last video that I actually had an FX 8350 given to me by one of my cousins for one of my birthdays there not long after. So the 4300 didn't last quite as long as my main system, and it was replaced by the 8350. But the 8350 then served me for a few years just the same, and it did a fantastic job as well. So while most tech reviewers, tech people in general, will remember in the long run, and probably rightfully so, the FX lineup from AMD as an utter disappointment and sort of the era when AMD really fell way behind Intel, I will always have a fond spot in my heart for the FX 4300 along with the 8350. They were fun CPUs to try to overclock, and that's where my love of PC gaming got started. So for me, even though they were a disappointment for AMD's bottom line, they always have a special place in my household, and I'll probably just keep these parts to take a look back at them even further down the road. But that's the story of my first gaming PC. I do want to hear from all of you out there. What's your first gaming PC? Give me the specs. Give me when you got it. What was the era? Was it recent? Long time ago? Just let us know all of your thoughts and stories about your first gaming PC in those comments down below. Otherwise, I'm gonna get out of here and go play some more games or something like that. That's not true. I'm gonna edit this video, but I will see you all in the next video.